Okay, so for the next 2 weeks, we get to study legal stuff, make paralegals out of all of you. Very exciting stuff. So it's a little dry, but it can be interesting. All right, so we're in our sourcing cycle again. And we're to the point where we've negotiated, selected. Now we're going to administer the contract. So the UCC, and I think we've talked about this before, the Uniform Commercial Code. So it's an agreement, or it defines things like agreements and contracts. So the UCC is developed by the UCC group, and then they send it out to each of the 50 states saying, this is what we think your contract legislation should look like. And the states either adopt it or change it. Usually they just adopt it as it says, but they come out like every year, and sometimes Washington will update it, and sometimes they'll skip a few years. So each state is on kind of a slightly different version of the UCC. But here's some terms that this stuff here from that we study, I don't think changes that often. Agreement is a bargain of the parties in fact and is found in their language by implication in other circumstances. And a contract is the total legal obligation which results from the parties' agreement as affected by this act. So an agreement is a subset of a contract according to UCC. Not that anybody in business ever uses it that way. So the two terms are used interchangeably. Offer and acceptance. So in order to have a contract, both parties, there's a proposal and both parties express interest and willingness to create our contract. And acceptance is the indication of an offeree to be bound by the terms of the offer. So you have an offer and an acceptance. The offer is oftentimes the purchase order, and the acceptance is the purchase order acknowledgement that we don't do anymore. But we'll get into some other forms of acceptance here too. Preliminary discussions and correspondence about price, quality, quantity, and so forth do not constitute a contract, nor do price quotes or advertisements. Those are not contracts. Issuance of a PO or submission of a price quote could constitute a contract if you got some acceptance. Counter offer. It's an offer to enter a contract on terms different. So either they don't like our T's and C's, or they more commonly they have a different idea on what it should cost. The acknowledgement is a communication informing the buyer the supplier has accepted the PO. So we used to do that, but we don't do that mess anymore. The terms can be changed from the PO. This runs into counteroffer. So this is called the battle of the forms. We tell them, here's your PO, here's our T's and C's, and they say, well, we don't accept your T's and C's. Here's our T's and C's. We'd like to use ours. And then we just come back and put the whammy on them and say, look, we're the buyer. You're using ours. Unless, of course, you're Cummings or somebody like that. So mistake in sending an offer. Generally, the terms of the offer with the mistake will stand unless the overseas should have known it was a mistake. So if somebody misquotes me on an RPI, and I know it's a mistake, then I can't hold them to it. If I don't know it's a mistake, I can't hold them to it, but it's not going to do anything good, because if it drives them out of business, you're going to be sourcing again anyway. Termination of an offer. If no time period is specified, an offer will expire after a reasonable amount of time. One of those legal words, reasonable. Okay. Offers can be revoked verbally in writing or by conduct consistent with no offer being longer being offered. So conduct consistent, that's a big thing. This is how we do acknowledgement also. Irrevocable offer. An offeree can purchase the right to have an offer stay open for a specific time, or you could be buying stuff from the mafia or selling stuff to them. Irrevocable offer. Consideration. legal requirement for the creation of a valid contract involving the exchange of value for value. So there has to be consideration to have a contract. In other words, you have to buy something of tangible value. Competent parties, so you can't be forming contracts with people under 18 years old for the most part. They have to be of mental capacity, which, you know, we all know crazy people, but they're talking about certifiably insane people here. Authority, you have to have the authority to bind the company. And sometimes referred to as capacity to contract or contractual capacity. Legality of purpose, so you can't have an enforceable contract with your drug dealer. And mutuality of obligations, both parties to the contract must be bound to carry out their obligations, also referred to as mutuality of contract. One party or the other, and acceptance by the other. So the way we get around to the acknowledgement is through this conduct consistent. So if I send the PO out and the supplier sends me a part, then there's a contract. He's accepted or she has accepted the contract by virtue of their behavior. All right, purchase orders. Legally binding document prepared by the buyer to describe the terms and conditions of a purchase. So it can function as both an offer or an acceptance or a confirmation or a trigger. Usually it's an offer. Usually does not constitute a contract by itself until after acceptance, which we address in our T's and C's in paragraph 1. So purchase order confirmations and acknowledgements. When to use? When you want to document that a contract exists, you get a written acknowledgement from the seller that they accept the terms of the PO. Unilateral versus bilateral inference. So the buyer makes the offer, performance by the supplier signifies acceptance, is what I'm talking about. If they ship me the parts, then they've accepted it. Exceptions to the terms and conditions can depend on whether it's a good or a service. So attorneys can advise you more there. So seller's exceptions to purchaser's terms. Suppliers must notify buyer of any exceptions to the T's and C's, which we don't even allow them to do anymore. Basically, they used to attach them up to, they used to be able to attach stuff to the RPI response, and they would always often attach their terms and conditions. So what we do, we just turned off that feature. Purchasers' exceptions to seller's item. Buyer must notify supplier of any exceptions to the terms of the supplier's acceptance. So that's notification in writing. So T's and C's. Fixed prices and quantities, including taxes. That's paragraph 2 of our T's and C's. Right of inspection and warranties, paragraphs 13 and 18. Right to change the designs, paragraph 3. Indemnification, paragraph 22. Supplier's right to assign the contract to a third party is paragraph 27. And our T's and C's say you can't do it without our permission. And shipping instructions are usually in paragraph 7 and 8. So
Rick,
yeah.
Quick question. So like with our T's and C's being contractual to our suppliers, when they acknowledge our purchase order and send their sales order with stipulations, and those stipulations contradict ours, how is that best handled from a supply chain management situation?
So that's called the Battle of the Forms. And PACCAR's position is we're not going to accept your T's and C's. Just tell them no. Just like Nancy Reagan, just say no. If that doesn't work, then you're going to have to go talk to your boss and say, okay, I got an issue here. Because they have to, unless they've got some really serious economic powers, they have to accept our T's and C's. Or they've got some part that they got a patent on that we just have to have. I mean, we run into situations where they won't, and we have to negotiate it out, but it's rare. So these are the PACCAR T's and C's. They're available on the e-portal to all of our supply base who's got access to the e-portal. And then the ISM T's and C's. This is another version. Here, these. No, I go find them this way. So this is something ISM put out. It's kind of the S&P 500 average for T's and C's. Every attorney wants to do their own, so that's for what it's worth. The P card, otherwise known as the purchasing card. So it's a company credit card that can reduce the number of routine transactions. These are used in indirect. This is not your expense credit card. That's something different. The P card is where I go buy goods and services for PACCAR on a credit card, and PACCAR pays the bill automatically. Now I have to provide them with receipts, but that's what a real P card is. And it's paid directly by accounts payable. That's not reimbursed on expense report. And it's for stuff that petty cash used to handle. Stuff under $500 that you don't want to write a PO for. And we don't use it on floor 4. It's always used down in floor 2 on the indirect side. Binding and non-binding letter instruments. So you've got the LOI, otherwise known as the letter of intent. So it's used to express expectation of contract formation in the future. Now, according to ISM, it's non-binding. It's just something that makes the supplier feel good that they won the business. The way we use it, it is binding. Assumes that it'll be superseded by a contract sometime in the future. And the purpose is to gain time, so the supplier often will want one so they can start tooling. Reserving a place in line, basing volume discounts on future business, encouraging suppliers to stock items, secure, if the supplier needs bonding, awarding major new business programs. And all of our stuff is kept here. And you get here from the Pi site. Oops. Which is, where's my Pi site? It's in here somewhere. Maybe not. If I just go here, I can pull it up. So Pi site, and then the agreement templates are down here. And you'll find all kinds of agreement templates in here. I'll cover a few over here. So there's the LOI. We use those to let the supplier, it's external. It's to let the supplier know they've won the business. It is not internal. So binding, which is what we use, confirms negotiations and agreement and used to procure samples or something like that prior to the DDA. We'll cover that in a minute. Non-binding must include a statement that says it's non-binding and contains conditional approvals and spells out parties' intents. I don't know of a lot of companies that use the non-binding LOI. LOAs. Now, according to the ISM, LOA is a letter of authorization. So if my boss goes on vacation for 2 weeks, he can write an LOA that gives me authority to sign for him. We don't use it that way, of course not. We use it as a letter of agreement, which is basically a mini contract. But just remember, this isn't part of the ISM test. As far as the test is concerned, it's a letter of authorization. They got different types of contracts. You got fixed price contracts. So this is what we try to use, except for we give them raw material changes. Price can't change during the term, except for a change in specifications, delivery, or terms. So cost reimbursable. This is kind of like your expense account. Establish estimate of costs, guarantee suppliers sufficient to cover the allowable costs. Financial for risk for cost reimbursable contracts falls on the buyer. And then indefinite delivery contracts, we use these. These are our contracts in GPPS, which are also blanket purchase orders. Using the exact times or quantities of future deliveries are unknown. Time and material contracts. So this is your automotive guy or construction will use these. Pays a set rate for labor and overhead and reimburses for or provides material directly. Letter contracts, preliminary written contract that allows the supplier to immediately begin production, which is basically an LOI. Blanket agreement, a blanket PO. This is what our contracts are. We rewrite the blanket at corporate, and the materials, division materials guys write the releases to the blanket. Dealer agreements, our dealers use these. We have these with our dealers. And service agreements, typically used in contracting services. So this is floor two indirect stuff. They don't use an LTA, they use an MSA or a master services agreement. Capital equipment maintenance, all the stuff that they buy down there. Professional services agreements, another version of the MSA. And then if you're curious, plant PO prefixes, if you want to know how we do business, this is what each of the POs start with. And then here's the e-buys down here. Maintenance agreements. So pack lease will use these. Preventive maintenance, scheduled replacement, or repair of equipment. And performance-based agreement, services for which outcomes or timeless are specified in the terms. We use these for guys like consultants like McKinsey. Licensing agreements, so we have a lot of these. That was floor two with software. Usually pay by the seat, requires true ups, which they go and look at all the computers and see how many copies of the software are actually out there, because we copy over the hard disks. Updates may or may not be included. So generally may cover the use of logos, brand names, stuff like that. That's also a licensing agreement. And technology for patented processes can also be a licensing agreement. Master purchase agreements. So this is, I would say it's a MSA, master services agreement, but sometimes I'll call them master purchase agreements. And specialty contracts typically include performance guidelines and milestones. Those for construction. And then there's government contracts, which are their own weird little animal. PACCAR has a couple of specialty contracts, the LTA, long-term agreement, and the design and development agreement. And this just goes back to the eyesight with the agreement. This is, though, a DDA, if you want to know what one looks like, it's from 2011, so it's 13 years old. This is for NGP radiators. I think Richard Lowe negotiated it. But it's got basic boilerplate, which ends there, and then it picks up with a statement of work that engineering has to write and all these other stuff. So they have to tell them exactly what it is we're contracting for. And we use these when we're sharing a lot of proprietary technology with the supplier and we're doing a joint development. A DDA provides much better protections for that than the LTA does. You can have both, doesn't hurt. But if you're doing a lot of development work, the DDA is better. All right. Which one of the elements listed is not necessary for a legal contract? Well, this is kind of a dumb question. Any guesses? I think it's probably incompetent parties. It is April Fool's Day, but B it is. All right. there are 7 questions out there. You guys go get to work on them. And well, it's 2:20. Took too much time. We'll go over answers at 2:28. Or you can raise your hand if you get done early. All right, we're at 227, so we'll go over some answers here. I can find them. Number 1 is Charlie. Costs plus a percentage of cost provides no incentive for supplier to control costs. And if you really want to get in and study these things, if you go to this slide here and click on these links, it will take you to a bunch of these where it talks about each of these contracts. But I didn't spend a lot of time on it because I don't think it's really worth it. There's only a few questions on them. So you just kind of try to guess at it. 2 is Delta. Time and material contracts typically provide for payment based on fixed hourly rates that include labor, overhead, and expenses. 3 is Alpha. A letter of intent is signed piece of paper that says the order is coming. 4 is Charlie. There are a few ways the seller can acknowledge the buyer's PO in terms and conditions, but the clearest way is to sign an acknowledgement of acceptance and send it back. 5 is Bravo. There was an offer. AFAB sent the PO, but there was no acknowledgement or acceptance by ABC, so no contract was formed. To form a contract, you must have both an offer and an acceptance. The supplier does not need to send a written acknowledgement. Okay, 6 is Alpha. There's no time period is specified. An offer will expire after a reasonable time period. And 7 is Bravo. Separating each line into a separate PO, the supply management professional will increase the number of POs written, thereby reduce the average cost of the PO. It's not really a legal question, but anyway. Any other questions? If not, we will pick up with more of this stuff tomorrow.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
See
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.